Today we're going to be talking about poverty as a pre-existing condition and what effect that has had on COVID-19. We are thrilled to have with us two leaders in the study of the social determinants of health. Sir Michael Marmot is a professor of epidemiology at University College London, director of the UCL Institute of Health Equity, and past president of the World Medical Association. He's the author of The Health Gap, The Challenge of an Unequal World, and other important books and reports, such as the recent Health Equity in England, the Marmot Review 10 Years On, which he will be talking about today. He has been awarded honorary doctorates from 18 universities, and in 2000 was knighted by the Queen for services to epidemiology and the understanding of health inequities. Dr. Otis Brawley is a professor of oncology and epidemiology at Johns Hopkins University, with appointments to the Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center in the School of Medicine and the Department of Epidemiology in the Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Brawley is an expert in cancer prevention and control, as well as efforts to reduce health disparities. He's a former chief medical and scientific officer and executive vice president of the American Cancer Society, and in 2015 was elected to the National Academy of Medicine. So welcome to you both. First, going to hear from Sir Michael, who is going to talk about social determinants of health, the Marmot Review's 10 Years On review, and talk about some of what this has meant when it comes to COVID worldwide. Dr. Brawley will be talking a lot about social determinants of health and health disparities in the United States, and specifically how COVID has played out in the United States.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. Well, it is a pleasure, except I'm talking about some rather unpleasant things. I've been concerned with inequities in health for a very long time, and I will talk about the report that I produced for England in February this year. And then the pandemic crashed upon us. And I've been saying from the beginning of the pandemic that it exposes the underlying inequalities in society and amplifies them. So just under 1 year ago, I had chaired a commission for the Pan American Health Organization on equity and health inequalities in the Americas, and we released our report, Just Societies, Health Equity, and Dignified Lives, making recommendations to the Americas, North, Central, South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, of what they could be doing on social determinants of health and health equity. In the report, we quoted Nelson Mandela: "Overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity. It's an act of justice. It's the protection of fundamental human rights, the right to dignity and a decent life." The opening line of my book, The Health Gap, was why treat people and send them back to the conditions that made them sick. And of course, I would encourage you to read The Health Gap. My purpose in showing to you now is to say I'm not going to talk about the healthcare system, although equity in access to the healthcare system, particularly during a pandemic, is of course vital. But I'm going to talk about the conditions that make people sick. In England, after we did the WHO Commission on Social Determinants of Health, published in 2008, the British government invited me to do a review of health inequalities to answer the question, how could we apply the findings and recommendations of the WHO Global Commission to one country, England? And I published the Marmot Review in February 2010. In February this year, on the 10-year anniversary of the publication of the Marmot Review, I looked at what had happened in the last 10 years. And my summary of the last 10 years is we have lost a decade, and it shows. If you look at improvement in life expectancy in England, it had been improving about 1 year every 4 years. for women and for men. This is going back to 1980. If I took it back to 1890, it would be about 1 year every 4 years. In 2010, there's a break in the curve, and the improvement in life expectancy just about ground to a halt. The question is, what happened in 2010? Well, we had a change of government. Could that have contributed to the slowdown in life expectancy? It's possible. One question that we had to deal with is that people asked, life expectancy's got to slow down sometime. It can't keep increasing. Maybe we just reach the end. Well, not true. When we look at other countries, the improvement in life expectancy, this is annual improvement in weeks, in all of these countries was greater than in the UK. In fact, the only two countries that had slower improvement than the UK were Iceland and the United States of America. And as you probably know, apart from last year, the previous 3 years, life expectancy declined in the US 3 years in a row. So we have similar problems. And I hope you'll see that what I report from our analyses in England has relevance to the United States. When we look at inequalities, when people think about inequalities in health, they usually think about the most deprived compared with everybody else. This is the index of multiple deprivation by area. And indeed, the most deprived do have shorter life expectancy than everybody else. But it's a social gradient. It's not just the poor are worse than everybody, but the less the deprivation, the longer the life expectancy. The gap for females was 7.7 years between the bottom decile and the top decile, 9.5 years for men. And the gap has been increasing. The gradient has been getting steeper. And when we look at regions, we see something, and you see a very similar picture in the US. This is women I'm looking at. For the least deprived, 10%, there's very little regional variation, and life expectancy was improving. In other words, if you're rich, it doesn't matter where in the country you live. Life expectancy is good and improving. If you're in the bottom 10%, much shorter life expectancy than the top 10%, and it matters enormously where you live. It was improving for women in the bottom 10% in London, but outside London, life expectancy was going down for women in the bottom 10%. So 3 pictures: life expectancy stopped improving, inequalities increased, and life expectancy for the poorest women outside London went down. And this was before the pandemic. We limped into the pandemic in a parlous state. In the US, this is life expectancy at age 50 by year of birth. People who were born in 1920 will be 50 in 1970. People who were born in 1950 will be 50 in 2000. And this is by deciles of income. So the poorest 10% got a small, and I'm looking at men here, got a small improvement. The next 10%, somewhat bigger improvement, bigger. The richer you were, the bigger the improvement. So the social gradient got much steeper. The inequalities got much bigger. That's men. The next slide is women. And oh my gosh, life expectancy went down for the poorest 10%, as it did in England, went down for the next 10%, went down for the third decile, for the bottom 30%. Life expectancy at age 50 for women declined and then increased, and the richer you were, the bigger the increase. The inequalities got dramatically bigger. Now let's look at COVID-19. I'm back in England. Here's the social gradient by deprivation for all-cause mortality, the grey, and you can see the greater the deprivation, the higher the mortality from all causes. And there's the mortality from COVID-19. I'll come back to this excess in a moment, but the social gradient is very similar for mortality from COVID-19 to the social gradient from all causes. It means that the causes of inequalities in health are similar to the causes of inequalities in mortality from COVID-19. This excess down the bottom can be attributed in large measure to people working in frontline occupations who are at high exposure to the virus and living in crowded, overcrowded conditions and in multi-generational households. And when we look at ethnic group, similar picture to that which you see in the United States. Look at women, Black British, astonishingly high mortality from COVID-19. When taking account of deprivation and other predictors, much of that excess can be explained by deprivation. For males, big excess, and more than half can be explained by deprivation. Bangladeshi or Pakistani, double the rate, and most of it can be attributed to deprivation. Now, in my 2010 review, I had 6 domains of recommendations. Give every child the best start in life, education and lifelong learning, fair employment and good work for all, a healthy standard of living for all. Everybody should have at least the minimum income necessary for a healthy life, healthy and sustainable places and communities, and taking a social determinants approach to prevention. And we looked at these in my 10-year-on report. I won't go through all of them. When we look at COVID-19, food insecurity doubled during lockdown. And that's an extra food insecurity due to supply issues. 2 million children were food insecure, living in households, and they themselves were food insecure, largely, of course, because of poverty, because of lack of money. Now, I asked, could the government that was elected in 2010, the Conservative-led coalition government, have played a role in the worsening health picture that I've described? The government presented austerity to us as if it was a moral imperative, and they had an ambition to roll back the state. And they did it, they achieved it. In 2009-10, public expenditure represented 42% of gross domestic product. That declined, and by 2018-19, that 42% had become 35%. We were in the middle of the European range, and we'd gone to the bottom of the European range. Still higher than the United States, I have to say, but then you don't have well-developed public programs. And that reduction was done in a most regressive way. The grey bars represent spending by local government, council spending per person by local authority, by degree of deprivation of the area. So in the least deprived 20% of areas, spending went down over the last decade by 16%. And then the poorer the area, the bigger the reduction. So in the most deprived 20%, spending per person went down by 32%. And of course, the greater the degree of deprivation, the greater the need, but the greater the reduction. I showed this graph to an economist from the World Health Organization, and she said, "You're making that up. I've never seen anything quite as regressive as that. The greater the need, the more money was taken away. Did it work? We were presented with austerity because we were told this was what was needed to get the economy back onto a sound footing. Well, it didn't work. This is wage growth between 2007 and 2018. And in the UK, it was negative. The only countries that did worse were Mexico and Greece. The US, which had a big stimulus package after the 2008 global financial crisis, not as big as some would have liked, had growth. We had shrinkage of wage growth. So it didn't work in its own terms, and it may well have damaged health and made health inequalities worse. What about early childhood? Poverty is defined as less than 60% median income. In 2010, 18% of children were in poverty before housing costs. After housing costs, it was 27%. And that 27% went up to 30% by 2017-18. Now let's look at family type. Look at lone parent not working. 61% of children were in poverty in 2010-11. That went up to 70% of children in poverty for a lone parent not working. Work was supposed to be the way out of poverty. So let's look at a lone parent in full-time work. 18% of children were in poverty. That went up to 30% of children in poverty. And then there were changes to the tax and benefits system from May 2015 to June 2017. Changes to tax and benefits by deciles of income. Let's look at working age families with children. If you were in the bottom 10% of income, your income went down by 15% as a result of the government's changes to the tax and benefit system. If you were in the second bottom 10%, it went down by 12%, and then the richer you were, the less the reduction. I sat with a former government minister from the previous government, and I showed him this slide and said, your government's policy was to make poor people poorer. And he looked uncomfortable and said, well, perhaps it was not our explicit policy. I said, they're very smart people in Her Majesty's Treasury. They must have told you that was the predictable effect of your policies. You wouldn't do that in the US, would you? This is from Sayers and Zuckman, and this is total tax, not just federal tax. It's total tax, federal, state, local consumption tax by income group. And you can see it's mildly progressive in 1950 up to the 80th, 90th centile of income, and then becomes steeply progressive after that. 1980, it's a bit more progressive lower down and a bit less progressive higher up. 2016, much less progressive. Wow, the top 400 earners have done pretty well. They've gone from there down to there. And then President Trump boasted biggest tax change ever in the history of the planet, the universe, the Milky Way, oh, goodness knows what. And yeah, he did make some changes. He improved things for the top 400, not much for everybody else. In fact, the effective tax rate for the richest 400 is 23%, and the effective tax rate for the bottom 50% is 24%. And for the middle 40%, between 50 and 90, is 27.6%. This is not what I would call a progressive taxation system. And that means there's less money to spend on social programs. In my 2020 English report, I drew attention to air pollution. This is mean PM10 concentrations. And the most deprived quintile in London had higher exposure to air pollution than the least deprived quintile. And similarly in Liverpool, Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Sheffield, in these other English cities. And we want to bring the climate change agenda and the health equity agenda together. We said that 100% of new housing should be carbon neutral by 2030 and aim for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, ensuring inequalities do not widen as a result. Let me finish with this quote. A well-being approach can be described as enabling people to have the capabilities they need to live lives of purpose, balance, and meaning for them. Where might I have got that from? Amartya Sen, economist and philosopher? Well, it could be, but no, it was the New Zealand Ministry of Finance. As we think about building back better after the pandemic, I would like us to put a well-being approach at the center of what we are trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Michael. We'll turn to Dr. Browley here in a second, but one kind of big picture question: the increases in life expectancy. You said that there is, some people ask, well, it has to stop sometime, and you showed that in other countries it has continued to go up. But do you have, or is there good research on kind of how long the human body can live? I mean, what is the upper limit of how long we can go?
Well, it's a very interesting question. And there's a demographer in Germany who's been plotting the maximal recorded life expectancy. So it's a rather odd way to do it. And it just keeps going up. This is the maximal. So the longest lived person, there's always one who's going to beat the previous record. And he likes to imply that there's no ceiling. It'll keep going on forever. That seems to me so biologically implausible that I have a little difficulty accepting it. What we do know, though, is Hong Kong, which now beats Japan for the longest life expectancy in the world, has life expectancy at least 4 years longer than we do. The UK, which isn't doing very well, has life expectancy at least 2 years longer than the United States. So we're a long way from the plateau. I wouldn't mind if the UK had the same life expectancy as Hong Kong. And my guess is people in the United States wouldn't mind if the US had the same life expectancy as the UK. They wouldn't like to think of it that way because they think we've got communism or socialized medicine or God knows what they think about the UK. So we've got a long way to go, even though we don't know what the biological maximum is. 4 years more would do us for a while. Thank you.
Yeah, I know the numbers in the PowerPoint you just showed, but what are, off the top of your head, what are the numbers in UK and Hong Kong?
So in Hong Kong, life expectancy for women is now over 87. That's the average for women. And for men, don't quote me, but it's around just under 83. Mm-hmm. And in the UK, we're over 80 for women, we're about 82, and we're about 79 for men. And I say the US is about 2 years shorter than that.